Welcome, everybody. I have Brian with me today, and we're going to talk about a different Star Wars game, not Star Wars Unlimited, not Star Wars CCG. I think those are the only two that come to mind, but we're here to talk about Star Wars Destiny and kind of do a 101 of Star Wars Destiny. A lot of people have been chatting about it. So I actually have, I think, an expert here. You describe yourself as an expert on,
I,
on Star Wars
I'll
Destiny?
take it. Yeah, I think
Okay.
that's.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Take
mean,
care of
I
the
was I
credit.
was pretty involved. Yeah, yeah. Thanks for having me. Yeah, I guess in the grand scheme of the Star Wars Destiny world, I would consider myself an expert. It was a very niche kind of game. I guess similar to what Star Wars CCG kind of is today, right? But yeah, I mean, it came out I think in 2016, and I kind of fell in love with the game. So I started a podcast around it. I started playing it competitively. It wasn't hyper competitive like something like Magic would be, but it had a pretty fun and like tight knit competitive community. And the game itself was very unique and had a lot of cool, interesting mechanics. So yeah, it was a fun game. I'm excited to kind of just dive into it.
Yeah, so why don't we kind of start at the beginning? So this came out 2016.
Yeah,
That was the first set. There was what, not nine sets that and it
nine.
was canceled. So it was 2016 around 2020, right before COVID.
Yeah.
I think that the last set was canceled. And I guess do you want to talk about some of the interesting things? If I'm just a casual person that stumbled across this, what do I need to know about Destiny? What makes it interesting? What makes it unique? What are some of the items that like, hey, do I start with set one or should I start with set five, six,
Sure.
seven? What's kind of a
Yeah.
roadmap there for getting into it?
Yeah, so getting into it right now is interesting. So there's two ways you can go about it. It does pretty well as a just kind of pick up some cards and play like the kitchen table with your friends or family. And for that, really any set is pretty good for that. And as long as the sets, as well as the sets that are kind of before and after that, because like most CCGs, they're generally designed to go together, right? As one set
Right.
releases with the next. What makes it unique? Uh, the main thing is going to be there's a dice element involved. So the way the game works is every deck is built around characters, one or more. You have a set number of points to spend on the characters you bring that your deck is built around. And each character has like a point value. So you can mix and match what you want up to a certain extent. And then those two characters, it's usually two, sometimes three, and the colors that they are made up of determine what cards you can put in your deck. And decks are only 30 cards, two copies of a card. And so, the deck building side is relatively open in that front. Um, but you can have lots of fun with it in terms of just building thematic decks. Luke Skywalker versus Darth Vader was like the first starter they came out with, and it's fun to just kind of make a simple deck like that and play at the table with your friends and family. And you can do that with just you know buying a couple packs or a box or whatever it is, and play it that way.
So
There's also
how did you
yeah
get the dice, right? Like, where did the dice go? If I just buy a pack, there's not a
yeah
die in there, right?
yeah.
How did you
So
get these dice?
the in the game, rares and legendaries come with a die associated with them, and so the way the game works is it unlike maybe a game like Magic where I take my turn, you take your turn. In Star Wars Destiny, each player takes actions back and forth. I do one thing, you do one thing, etc., until we run out of stuff to do, and then we start over. And so part of that is the dice element, where any rare card or characters they have dice associated with them. So when you play them, you pull the associated with dice that comes with it, and you put it on the card. And then whenever you activate that card for the first time in a round, you roll their dice into your kind of dice pool in the middle. And so each there's like a bunch of different symbols that do different things, give you resources to play other cards, do damage, different types of damage, things like that. Give yourself shields, etc. Um, and so that like yeah, it's actually it was unfortunately while I thought it was a very fun aspect of the game. Ultimately, I think it was a big part of the game's downfall because it's such a logistic nightmare to print and ship them. Like they had numerous shipping delays on sets that caused a lot of rift in the community. But it adds a fun element of like mitigating risk. I almost liken it to poker in that like you're kind of like have to be good at determining your best odds of success because you have chances to re-roll dice if you want. So you have to determine, is it worth re-rolling this or just take what I got, kind of thing. And then like one of your actions is after they're activated, you can use those dice to do things and take actions that way. So that's like probably the most unique element to Destiny compared to any other card game I've played.
So, I mean, one of the things I really like about the dice or any game is I don't really love games that are super deterministic, right? I
Yeah.
like that RNG element a little
A
bit
big
because I
chess
think,
fan.
yeah, yeah, like I like a little bit of chance involved
Sure.
because I think it can help steady out like imbalance in decks, right? You're bringing a $2,000 deck with all legend,
Absolutely.
whatever cards, and I have a $50 deck, but I am a better player and I know how to use that RNG to my
Yep.
advantage, even if you have better cards. So I think it can level a playing field between two people that might have a disparity in decks. But with Magic, it can get really absurd. Like usually it's
Uh-huh.
the more expensive deck wins, right? Like, and that
Yes.
is a bit of a bummer. It's not like the better. Obviously, you have to have a base level of
Yeah,
skill.
and there's matchups that come into play, of course, and that's true in Destiny as any other game. But like, it does add an element of there is really no such thing as a completely unwinnable matchup. If if you get lucky enough, anybody could win any game. Yes, there are some that are way worse than others, right? And it's about managing that risk and taking the right actions when you want to. That combined with the back and forth actions make it so it's much more difficult to just steamroll someone,
Mm,
because you have a chance to react to every little thing that they do, as opposed to something like Magic, where maybe I'll just sit here for 5 minutes while you do some 12 card combo thing that I can't do anything about, right? You can't really do anything like that in Destiny.
yeah, I'll be honest. Games that have I've really enjoyed the Star Wars Unlimited. Never played Destiny, but I've enjoyed the back and forth
Yeah,
interaction because it doesn't allow my brain to snooze. Because
yeah,
sometimes when people have like 7 minute turns, I'm just like, what was
yep,
it gonna do? I have the attention
exactly.
span of a butterfly these days,
Yep,
right? And I just cannot
yeah,
remember.
you're engaged the whole time. Yeah,
Yeah, so I think it helps with that flow a little bit, and I guess this is something Star Wars Unlimited borrowed from this,
mhm,
and I think that's good because it keeps you engaged. Yeah, there's just I mean with Star Wars CCG as well. Like the turns could be like 10 minutes long, and I'm
yeah,
like,
yeah,
I
yeah.
just feel beaten down. So gameplay wise, is a match like close to like 15 to 20 minutes? What's kind of the length of a normal game?
Yeah, it depends on I guess what time of deck you're playing. Aggro game's going to go way faster, but yeah, it's generally anywhere from 15 to 35 minutes is probably some of the longer games. I think I've had a couple that go 40, but that's just like if you're playing two really slow decks against one another. But the average game is 15, 20, up to 30 minutes. Um,
So I'm curious about sort of the history of the game a little bit because I'm an amateur historian here, right? So it looks like that the set was it called Spark of Hope came out in July of 2019, and then there was like a long pause, right? It was like
yeah,
that was set 7 maybe, and then set 8 Covert Missions was like 9
2 months
months
after.
later.
Yeah.
What was like the vibe in the community then, where it's like, is this RIP, right? Like, was it kind of like
Yeah. There was a lot of doom and gloom for sure. Especially because if I'm remembering correctly, I think that was set two. Um, and so, like, the first set came out, the game was relatively popular, and then you just could not find product anywhere. And there
mm,
was that huge gap in between. Um, it, you know, the biggest problem we had was that Fantasy Flight Games, the company that made the game, wasn't particularly communicative at the time. I will say they've gotten a lot better with Unlimited, so that's really nice to see. But at the time, nobody could figure anything out what was happening. They would just say the game, is on the boat, and so that's kind of what I alluded to earlier about the dice. It turns out that they had like tons of manufacturing issues trying to print the massive amounts of dice and ship them across the ocean because they were made overseas and get them here. And so there were just delay after delay. But yeah, it caused a big rift in the community. A lot of people who wanted to get in the game couldn't. Game it was just prohibitively expensive, and the meta got really stale, obviously, because we were stuck in the same meta for 9 months or whatever it was. So I really think that stifled the game's growth a lot, unfortunately. Um, but yeah, I mean that's kind of what happened there. And they had smaller instances of that throughout. other set releases, but nothing quite that bad after that one.
So was there a pretty big degree of power creep by set 7, 8? Like, was it kind of like if you don't have the latest sets, then don't even bother?
It wasn't quite that bad, but there was definitely power creep. There were some cards that were just straight up better versions of cards in the first two sets, for example. I can only think of a couple examples. Like a Force Speed is one that comes to mind as like a card that was just so like it needed to be in every blue deck you played. And so it it like I would say there was a little bit of power creep every set, but nothing overwhelming. By set 9, yeah, sets cards from sets 1 probably aren't gonna compete as much. There's a couple that stand out that would, but for the most part, and also they were starting to talk about rotations and stuff like that, so they would phase those out anyway. But yeah, by the time set 9 came around, there was definitely a noticeable power difference. Uh, and I guess this is a good time to I just wanted to also point out because I mentioned earlier there's 2 ways to kinda get into it if you're looking to now. So
Yeah.
there's the traditional, which is just like I said, buy some cards and go play with friends. I also shortly after the game was discontinued, I helped, found although I'm no longer actively involved with it, just, life gets away from you, but there's a continuation committee, kind of like Star Wars CCG has, called the Renewed Hope. There's still a bunch of active players that are actively developing for the game, coming out with new sets, releasing cards that you can print on your own, and the hosting events. I think they're actually talking about doing their first World Championships this year. Um, and the nice thing about that is if you play digitally, like you play something on Tabletop Simulator, and it's free. So if you're interested in the game and you want to just kind of get a feel for it, I definitely recommend checking them out. Everyone in that community is super helpful. They have people playing all the time. It's a small community, but it's a nice one. It's helpful. Yeah.
I found the website.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
It's always nice to see continued committees because I think, as you note, life gets away from you. I think what if you asked 13 or 14-year-old me what my dream job would have been, probably was going to be to design video games, right? And I think a lot
Sure.
of these continuing committees give people an opportunity to perhaps have their dream job as well as their day job and to be able to take some of the transferable skills. Like, I've been impressed with some of the continuing committees I've interacted with, which is probably like 4 or 5 at this point with different games. I'm
Yeah.
like, oh, these people know how Excel works. Like they understand like
Yeah.
PowerPoint or like like
Yeah.
modern office skills.
I mean, it was frankly, it sounds a little ridiculous, but it was not that different from starting a company because I wanted to make now I'm not it was a bunch of us involved. It's not something I've obviously built my own by any means, but I when we were building it, we wanted structures in place where there are different people with different responsibilities. There's play testers, there's processes in place, and they've expanded upon. I mean, I haven't been involved for a couple of years now, and they've expanded upon that a lot. And I'm just impressed with how quality they continue to put out every month. So it's cool to
Yeah,
see.
I give a lot of credit to every continuing committee. It's definitely a dream job for my 13-year-old self, but for
Yeah,
my older self, I'm like, oh crap, it's another like admin thing I have to do.
yeah. I barely have time to play games. Never mind designing
Yeah,
them. Right.
yeah, or like run tournaments or like
Yeah. Yeah.
I was talking to a guy who does it with Middle Earth CCG, and
Mm.
he's like trying really hard to put on tournaments. He's talking about like getting hotel blocks and like
Yep.
organizing play space, and he
Yeah.
has
They,
to
they have
charge
like a
money
booth
to
at
do.
Gen Con, I think, or they're talking about doing. Yeah, it's a lot.
Yeah, and it's like that's fun, but this is volunteer work ultimately. So it looks like this might be a good sort of starting point. You want to learn more about the game. This might be first place. It looks like they have some databases, which Discord. Discord's always a great place to ask
Yep.
questions. Probably better than Facebook. but so Brian, any kind of final thoughts here? Just overview of the game. Anything to kind of close out here?
Yeah, I mean, it's I guess it depends on kind of where your mindset is at. If you're looking because you are just a fan of Star Wars and you're just looking for a fun game to either play with your friends, maybe play competitively with something like a Renewed Hope, or just like have something you could break out with your kids or something. I think it's perfect for that. Kids especially will. I have would love the dice. In fact, one of the first big tournaments I went to, there were like 6 or 7 kids under 12 years old, which is really cool to see. So it's a really fun game from that perspective. The back and forth is really unique. So yeah, I mean, it was a very original game that I think had a really cool design elements, and yeah, I mean, it's worth checking out if it's something you might be interested
One final question here for you. Was it sort of like with the print run that the eighth and ninth set are like nowhere to be found? Is it kind of like the print one run started here and then
in. Yeah.
by the end there's like
Uh, so eighth and ninth, no, they had full production lines. To be honest with you, it's been a couple years, so I don't like have vivid memory. Like I don't remember having trouble getting product for sets 8 and 9. I remember there were some rumors that 9 was going to be the last set, so people, probably like bought it up a little bit more than they may have otherwise. And set 10, like leaks came out, but we never saw. So
interesting.
yeah.
It's just like on a shared drive somewhere.
Yeah, yeah. I actually think that it got leaked eventually, like the cards, because I remember the Renewed Hope committee. I think we used some of the mechanics that were going to be in set 10 in our first set. So
Well, that's very cool. Well, Brian, thanks for giving us kind of the crash course here in Star Wars Destiny. Maybe we'll do some deck tech. I don't know. If people are
yeah,
interested in learning a little bit more, we can go in a
yeah,
deeper dive. Brian's podcast is a great resource for that as well. I'll leave a link in the show notes here. So if you want a little bit more, but Brian, thanks for hanging out. That's all the time we have today. We'll catch everybody next time.